Lights were blind. Good morning. It's terrific to be here with such a terrific panel and talking about what I think is going to prove to be one of the most important fundamental technological transformations and industrial transformations going forward, the so-called Internet of Things. The glib way of thinking about the Internet of Things is social media for machines. What if machines were on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or Pinterest? That's not as rhetorically ridiculous as you might think, because going on along with the Internet of Things are all the data and the machine learning and artificial intelligence to go along with it. So we're going to deal with a variety of those kinds of issues going forward. I have a terrific group of people here dealing with everything from security issues to consumer issues to industrial issues, and to what extent Internet of Things is going to be an infrastructure and both an ecosystem. So you all can read. I don't need to do the introductions here. We're going to begin with a couple of quick answer questions. I do want to go to the audience sooner rather than later. I'm going to ask you not just to raise your hand, but to stand if you have a question or comment, because the lights here are sufficiently bright that I can literally barely see you on this. So I'm going to go around, and I'm going to begin with the gentleman, Alex, who's sitting right next to me. And for all of our people on stage here, what's the most important thing you think this audience needs to understand right now about the Internet of Things? Alex.
It's a big question. I think it's just the depth of the wave and how many sort of unexpected consequences it's going to yield. I see it as similar to the first two phases of the internet in my mind. Sort of the information came online, and you said it had this formation of a knowledge graph and all these sort of rippling implications around that. Then people came online with connections everywhere, and there's the implications of the social graph. And similarly here, I think there's going to be a physical graph and all sorts of both direct sort of first phase effects that we can see. I think there's going to be sort of ripple effects that are such second order effects that we can see, and then I think there's going to be a lot of unexpected consequences. So
in the same way Facebook defined and redefined the social graph, you think Internet of Things is going to be the physical graph?
Yes, and I think its obvious implications are things like you can monitor anything from anywhere, and you can control anything from anywhere with software. And sort of the second order effects are things like, well, could we use this to help a whole generation of elders stay longer in their homes, or go after sort of carbon emission issues through the adoption of these technologies? And then the third order effects, I think, are things that we just can't predict yet. In the same way that if you looked at Google and you said, okay, it displaced information search, but then all forms of advertising, but then sort of unexpected, you can do disease vectoring based on symptoms. Who knows what the implications are going to be.
So emergent properties. Yeah. So the same question to you, Bridget. You oversee Internet of Things strategy for Intel. Yeah. What's the most important thing this audience needs to understand about the Internet of Things going forward from the Intel perspective and from your perspective?
Okay, what's the most important thing about the Internet of Things? Well, first of all, we're expecting something like 50 billion devices to be on the market by 2020. That's roughly 6 devices for every person on the planet. So we have a lot of devices. These devices with IoT are expected to be connected to each other, to the internet, to share data. And when we think about what's the most important thing for us, we think about security. We think that with all those devices on the market, those are many opportunities for threats and vulnerabilities. And so we believe that security is fundamental to the success of IoT, and that security needs to be designed in at the onset, at the very sort of silicon level of a hardware device.
What a coincidence! Intel doing something at the silicon level. That's remarkable that you would do that. Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we look at
is that a huge capex for you? It's hundreds of millions to build a fab. Is it going to be as capital intensive going to a secure Internet of Things environment as it is for the microprocessors and comms chips that dominate?
You know, we're already on the roadmap with putting security. We do it today with our vPro, with TXT, and with Secure Boot. So this is something that's part of our natural design. When we talk about the IoT, and particularly when you think about, you know, what's the one thing you want to remember, it's really making sure that security is embedded at the deepest level possible.
Excellent. Well, that could not be a better transition to the not so token, no pun intended, security person, Mark, on the panel. What advice, with your answer, what advice do you have for the Intels and network providers of the world as what's key going forward for the Internet of Things?
Well, I have to address first your comment about the Internet of Things being like social media for things and devices. The concept of my refrigerator, you know, tweeting or Snapchatting or sexting is kind of disturbing. So, like my refrigerator is going to be sexting my DVR or something.
How much of a food fetish do you have?
Not large, actually. Okay. To the point of security, I was really heartened to hear that Intel's thinking about these things this way, but broadly, from my optic, the biggest thing that people need to understand about the Internet is, the Internet of Things, IoT is going to be massive. With IPv6, we'll have the possibility to connect up to 78 octillion devices. That's 78 billion new devices to the Internet. And while we may only get 50 billion or 100 billion by 2020, the system complexities are phenomenal. We can't even protect the stuff that we have online today, the servers, the laptops, the smartphones, the iPads, and yet we're running full speed ahead to convert every physical object in on our planet to an information technology. And so thinking in security and engineering it up front is really, really key. I will say that there are many companies that are not doing that, particularly new players. They get really excited about creating an internet-enabled, you know, plant, and then they're like, wow.
So I'll just ask a tongue-in-cheek, fun question
Sure.
for you. When will we have a Stuxnet for consumer devices on the Internet of Things?
So
just predict.
Yeah,
2015.
Yeah, consumer devices aren't probably the huge threat, right? But the other IoT objects are the first version of the IoT, which are SCADA systems, industrial control systems.
Right.
And that's where the original Stuxnet was directed. So all of our critical information infrastructures, financial services, healthcare, health records, air traffic control, you know, 911 systems, they are all run by computers and they're all hackables. And so as we scale up from, you know, the smart individual wearing, you know, with wearables, embeddables, implantables, ingestibles, and then we take that up to the smart home, to then the smart block, to the smart city, to the smart nation. The ability to degrade all of that technology is quite possible. And even if somebody doesn't do it because they're an attacker with malicious intent, just the system complexities alone.
Emergent complexities. Well, that's, you know, clearly after that wonderful upbeat message there, Gary, you run Consumer Electronics Association. What's the most upbeat and optimistic important thing that people in this audience should know going forward? Because you literally get to see the entire panoply of your portfolio companies from all over the world look at things both from a device level and from networking those devices levels.
So 15 years ago, we talked about the internet, and then 10 years ago, we talked about the inevitability of wireless. And I think those are accurate predictions that the collective technocracy here made. And I think the Internet of Things falls in that, because the Internet of Things, to me, will solve some of the major world problems that we talk about today. Where the Internet spread information, the Internet of Things is actually actionable information. And it really stemmed because, look, 1 billion phones have been sold worldwide, and that allowed all these great sensing devices to go to 1/10 the price they were just a few years ago, whether they're accelerometers or pressure things or all sorts of sensing devices. So when you talk about agriculture production and clean water and world hunger and poverty, you're talking about things which are going to be resolved in part because farmers will know through their devices what type of fertilizer, what type of water, what type of everything. We will solve big, big, big world problems. I'm not saying we won't have other problems, but that's where I see as the big, big problems. Of course, on the consumer device.
So the infrastructure, and I'll follow up with the other word, ecosystem for coordinating and networking devices to address a variety of problems, be it smart house to smart neighborhood to smart city, you're comfortable with the way those architectures are evolving to address those
Well,
problems?
absolutely. So a couple of years ago, we had a Internet of Things portion at the International CES, which we own and produce. This past show in January in Las Vegas, we couldn't do it. We had 900 companies showing Internet of Things products. The entire show, I mean, we still have 3,600 companies, but 1/4 of them were showing products that are Internet of Things. So
Were they vaporware products or real products?
some of them are real products, and some of them are agricultural products. Some of them are products that tell you whether your baby has a problem, and alarms go off. Or there's very smart people solving problems, coming up with real solutions. Some of them will have markets. Some of them will flop. That's what we do here. We try out new things, and whether or not there's a market for them, we'll see. But in terms of, look, you're going to healthcare, and anyone who's been in a hospital knows we could use the internet thing in a hospital. We don't want people coming in our room every 10 minutes to tell us, what our temperatures or our blood pressure. Just the devices themselves, and the fact that these sensors are moving away from the wrist and clip onto different parts of your body, and even internally soon, will give phenomenal amount of information.
Would you get an implantable?
Would I get an implantable?
You wear a Fitbit?
Yeah, I have no problem getting an implantable. I'm also, in terms of privacy and things like that, I'd do anything to get through an airport quicker. I'd walk naked if it just, what do I have that's so, if you want a suit that fits, you tell the tailor what your measurements are. You have to give up information to get information.
I think it's one of those things where it's clear the opportunity is so enormous in sort of every facet of every industry, and like any technology wave, it's got some major risks associated with it. I think the sort of existential risks, if they exist for the Internet of Things, are really the security and privacy front. But I do see, we see a sort of an upwelling of a lot of sort of, because these things are things you bring home or put in your bodies and so on, at least I see a huge number of like-minded peers across the industry that are sort of building in security as the true north. Building in privacy would be another interesting thing to talk about, but sort of key tenets at the early stages so that you can mitigate some of those risks and take advantage of the
Let me just follow up with
opportunity.
Specifically on this. Just 1 second on that, Mark. Samsung does a huge campaign for their phones and their other devices, the next big thing. But the reality is, last year they bought your company. Samsung bought your company. Why? Why? Are you a hedge, or are you going to be, are your smart
things? What are we going to do?
Exactly, smart things. Are your smart things going to be a niche or a platform for a Samsung that really lights a fire under Intel or an Apple?
I think much more the latter. So the market it will be clear over the coming months exactly what we're doing. But
disclose something now.
We'll be the sort of the enabling platform behind certainly all of Samsung's efforts as a very big consumer electronics maker. But they also, after seeing the Android ecosystem develop in smartphone and seeing the IoT as big or bigger an opportunity, there's sort of a very big push to have an open and neutral platform that brought together user experiences across all sorts of different devices, because it's one of those places where it's not going to be one manufacturer, it's not going to be one software vendor, and what we've done uniquely is sort of create an ecosystem of tens of thousands of developers and device makers from the outside. So.
Before we go to Mark, what's the most important thing you've learned about designing security when you started up as an entrepreneur, and now that you have Samsung determining you, how are you revising, refining, enhancing, scaling that security sensibility?
I guess there's sort of 3 underlying points that come up really quickly. One is it's always, that security is not a feature, right? It's something designed as a principle into everything that you do. And so we have to look at it that way and holistically and sort of really apply energy to it top to bottom, from the silicon to the end point where the consumer is being touched or the customer is being touched or the machine is being touched by these platforms. So that I think has continued to be validated. We've seen the sort of feature-based security sort of break down continuously in the face of the innovation.
The second?
Second is this, open platforms, I think, will tend to be the most secure. And so we have really become more open. Even open was part of our mantra at the beginning, but we've become progressively more open over time, right? So on security, we publish the architecture, we invite, we actually support white hat security audits, I'll call them, people trying to break it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, tended to yield a much better result than if we tried to sequester ourselves, away.
Many eyes, shallow bugs. And the third?
I think that it was the open approach and the third was sort of always be gut checking yourself, right, with that open community, always looking for the edges, and and we're doing that.
One thing that you mentioned, which I thought was a good point, is you referenced the tenets and what are the fundamental tenets for a successful IoT implementation. And at Intel, we defined, and we actually worked with the industry to define sort of the top tenets we felt are the most critical to when you think about what an IoT solution needs to look like. And we start with security as the fundamental, sort of the most important layer, if you will, at the hardware and the software layer, as you referenced. The second one is connectivity and having
Can you
the
put
ability.
that, is the
Yeah.
slide up? Can you see the, we can't see if the slide, the essential tenets up, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, what this is, just to give you a quick look at this, what are tenets? Tenets are the principles, I think it was so nicely stated here, the fundamental things that you need to think about to each IoT implementation needs to have. So security, fundamentally. Being able to discover a device by the cloud in a secure and be able to authenticate that. The notion of data normalization. You've got all these different devices with different data formats. You've got to be able to normalize that data, ingest it, and move
just to
it
clarify,
through.
in the same way one normalizes a database with different kinds of data types, here you have an explosion of different data types because of the different kinds of sensors that are there, and they have to be reconciled.
Absolutely.
That's pretty non-trivial.
That's very non-trivial. It's a complexity. The other thing is, all these devices and all this data being generated, the value of that is to be able to analyze it, analyze these richer data sets to be able to get valuable knowledge to improve real-time decision making. And then finally, with all this capability, the whole purpose of IoT is to enable transformation. And so you want to be able to monetize, the data that you've collected. You want to be able to figure out new business models. We have customers we have a heating and air conditioning customer that is a manufacturer of heating and air conditioning equipment.
Name it.
Daikin Applied.
Okay.
Okay, and they basically connected to the IoT solution set with our gateway, and now
Did they connect with it because they were smart or because they were scared?
They connected with it originally, it's a great question, originally because they were trying to figure out efficiencies for predictive maintenance, to figure out, when, to save. If I'm going to send somebody out there, don't just do it because it's, a certain date, but do it because you've anticipated there is a potential failure. What they found, though, is they were generating real-time data, and they thought, oh, that's a new business model. I'll offer that to my customers as a new service. So now Daikin, who's this, manufacturer that's probably got air conditioning units on the building here, they're now into a new business model. So that's the concept of these essential tenets. As you think about it, they're really talking about transformation. This is sort of how it looks.
Michael?
Please.
First of all, I just want to be clear that I don't want to be pigeonholed as the guy who's like always saying bad stuff.
We are not pigeonholing you.
I
We're
agree.
stereotyping
Thank you.
you.
Stereotype,
Okay.
different. All right. I agree with what Gary said, and I think the opportunities for the Internet of Things are phenomenal. Healthcare being one very clear example. Agriculture. There are even crazier things going on. Like there's now interspecies internets, a great example. Out in Australia, animals around the world are being put on the internet. In Australia, right in the Great Barrier Reef, they have the greatest number of shark attacks in the world. They've now outfitted all the sharks they can find with transceivers, so they're tweeting beachgoers when they come within a kilometer of the beach. So
What do the sharks say?
So
Nom, 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 nom.
Exactly.
Come in the water.
Exactly.
Water's
That's what they
great.
say. So I think that it's
Tweet is an inappropriate verb for a shark.
well for a shark, whatever sharks do. But I want to come back to both the issues of privacy and the issues of interconnection. I would love to be able to go through an airport without being harassed, but I'd love to be able to do that without getting naked, right? And I don't think that it's not the way that I want to do it. There should be a way to go through an airport quickly, efficiently, without being harassed and without taking off all your clothes. And if we look at some of the privacy implications of the IoT, they're quite profound in terms of, your Fitbit being able to track you, the other things. There are accelerometers in your phone that can be sold and leveraged to healthcare companies to, go ahead and quote your race. We're putting black boxes in cars that'll tell auto insurers how well you're driving. So some people will enjoy that, some people won't enjoy that, and it allows, on the law enforcement and government side, some really persistent surveillance. The FBI, years ago, when they first introduced OnStar, in the year 2000, the FBI was using OnStar to remotely activate it, to listen in on the conversations of gangsters, of, La Cosa Nostra. So we'll see a lot more of that. And you talked about heating and air conditioning. Really cool stuff that you can do there. But let's go back to the Target hack of last Christmas. Most people might not realize that how the criminals got into the Target financial management network was through a heating and air conditioning contractor in Michigan, I believe it was. They broke in, a contractor clicked on a bad link, that was their heating and air conditioning systems at Target was connected to the overall Target contractor network, which went to the financial management systems, which eventually got them to the point of sale so that 100 million accounts could be compromised. So this is what I mean by system complexity. Smart homes, Nest, all of these smart devices sound great, but you end up finding that there are connections, or more precisely, bad guys find there are connections that you never anticipated.
The issues of how you define these rules of engagement and read-only versus, rights, having rights to things is key. I want to go to the audience, but I want to ask one question. So those of you who haven't and are runners, if there's anybody with pulls you over for a question, please, signal to me. But I just want to follow up. Let's go back to the previous slide on there we go, and monetize with APIs. Application programming interfaces, different kinds of data management business models. Whenever I see the acronym API, I think ecosystem, developers.
Yeah.
Are we at the stage, you talk in your blog about the importance of developing developer communities for this. When we look at Facebook and Twitter, we see developer communities. What is the most interesting thing going on in the developer community for Internet of Things? Because to my mind,
feeding sharks.
yes,
In second place.
by the way, if you can get a shark to write in Python, I'll be impressed.
Python's right in Python.
Sorry, mixed animal metaphors.
I thought you were talking about lawyers.
I would put more money on a shark writing in Python before a lawyer, but that's a separate topic. Do people in your companies, is Internet of Things looked at as an emerging infrastructure and platform, or is it looked at as an innovation ecosystem? You've literally written books on innovation ecosystem. So what's the level of sophistication of your members and participants in that regard? And then Intel is going to.
Well, everyone's looking for opportunity in growth markets, and there's no question there's a growth market here that's huge.
Right.
And I'm not sure the difference between an ecosystem and
an infrastructure.
And an infrastructure. And you have opinions on it and others do, but I won't venture one. But I will say that when I think of what's going on today with, for example, the Internet of Things is being used in the railway system to predict which rail cars are broken and take them out and service them, and it's getting a tremendous amount of analytics. I've been to the OnStar data center in Detroit, and when I look at that, and it's great because everyone with an OnStar, at least in the United States, and I think maybe Canada as well, if they have, the airbag goes off, they have it on the map. It's like Star Trek. And if they had a near collision, you could see it. And you could see, and what that gathers, phenomenal amount of data of where accidents are occurring. And I couldn't help but wonder if that is being used to say this is where accidents are occurring and maybe we should fix certain streets and things like that. But what the issue of the Internet of Things to me is where is the ecosystem which will take all this phenomenal data and turn it to something usable? And you talk about the trade-offs with privacy. I can't help thinking, maybe it's because it's so recent and so visual to me, is that if we had last night in Baltimore a system set up where people have facial recognition and fingerprint recognition, we wouldn't have had those riots that occurred because there's accountability and there's a trade-off between privacy and public safety. So I think of the debates that are occurring, and I don't know whether it's an ecosystem. I know we have to have the debates. Privacy, security are important. But on the other hand, we have, as a society, certain obligations towards each other, and just as the Internet has helped us find some solutions, so too should the Internet of Things.
Well, I agree. From a privacy perspective, we need to be aware of all that stuff. If you look at Baltimore, that is a great example. Clearly, there's a tremendous amount of crime being committed there by some people that are quite upset. But you can take that to the next level. So in regimes around the world, whether it be in China, Syria, Iran, and elsewhere, they do have biometrics and facial recognition. And it's not just when people are violent, but they're when people go against the government. So things that would be guaranteed under our Constitution here. Once you build that global surveillance network or city surveillance network, I think Cisco sold 500,000 surveillance camera into the city of Chengdu in China, right, to build a very profound surveillance system. So again, it's great for preventing crime and free speech and other things that might run afoul of the government.
So preventing crime, going back to your question on the developers, what I think we're starting to experience, and we sometimes refer to IoT as the next evolution of computing, and we're excited about it because when we talk about the challenges and some of the optimism we've talked about here, you ask about the developer community.
Yeah.
For a market to really take off, you've got to ignite the developer. You've got to capture the imagination of developers. And a great example, Intel has developer kits, and many of the us in the
You guys
industry-
bought Mashery.
Yeah.
It's
So-
a big API company.
So the developer community is fundamental. It's where the innovation starts to ignite. And you mentioned a little bit ago about the baby and the car seat. One of our employees, a young mother, was thinking about the Internet of Things, and she designed a little clip, what we call now the smart clip, that fastens onto a child's car seat, and it's got a built-in Bluetooth sensor that can communicate to the parent's phone so that it can alert the parent if the child becomes unbuckled. So this is the kind of thing where we think about, there's a little dev kit that she had and she figured it out. So it's one of those things where the developer community is not only fundamental, it really is critical for a market to really take off.
I think, I'll just make a couple of comments on it. I think it's also not just a generic community. I think there's lots of chances for ecosystems to develop we look at it as there are device makers. Clearly, there's going to be a lot of connected things that are sold, and so do the underlying technologies behind that, so component technologies and so on. There's developers, which like folks that build mobile apps and so on today, they're not creating hardware, but they're developing new intelligence or fun or whatever functionality into these things. And then there's service providers, and we see tremendous opportunities in each. And where infrastructure comes in is in some cases you have to enable an ecosystem, you have to have an infrastructure in place.
Right.
Because developers are very daunted if you're just a software developer by even a hardware toolkit, and so on. They might just want to buy off-the-shelf stuff and develop apps. And so we've looked at areas in our platform and sharing with others for enabling each of those types of folks in the ecosystem. And when it happens, it's really magical because you have device makers that, let's say, come up with a sensor for security purposes, a motion sensor. But then a developer gets a hold of that, and they make a great elder care solution for monitoring motion patterns of grandma, and when there's an anomaly, notify the kids. Right? And then in the service provider side, I started the company after a big flood event at a house out in the mountains in Colorado, and it's very gratifying that now it's sort of filled in the gap of it both senses the moisture, it can shut off the water valve, but the service is it can call the plumber too. So before I search, right, when something is urgent, and think about the health issues of that and so on, is the ability to go service something quickly. So there's all these parts of the ecosystem, and infrastructure enables them all, and that's where the opportunities come.
So we saw with the first and second waves of the internet, certain industries dissolving. Software eats the world. Google kicks the crap out of the traditional media, YouTube, et cetera.
Yeah.
So is the Internet of Things going to make, and then we'll go to the audience, is the Internet of Things going to make Samsung and Intel better frenemies? Are you guys going to compete more? Let's extrapolate out here, because I look at the Internet of Things and smarter things, whether on industrial controls or consumer products. I can easily imagine a scenario where you won't be on the same stage together, but I can also imagine a scenario where you both add another $10 billion to each other's bottom lines. So what is the competitive view on this?
I think, boy, this is, every time a new market emerges, there's lots of activity, and everybody's sort of vying for, I have this platform, I have that platform. But what you're finding is the reality of what happens is we do both. We find new opportunities to collaborate, and then we also find, that's competitive to what I have. It's like, okay, well, yeah. So it's a little bit of the frenemy kind of situation. Right. It absolutely is that. And in fact, many of we have a rich ecosystem of partners that we work with. And what's interesting, though, about IoT that you started to touch on is that the IoT is also opening up opportunities for a new ecosystem, new alliances to happen. We're working with companies that we hadn't been working with before that have now been added to our ecosystem. A company that is a software developer that writes fleet transportation software. And so connecting that with our IoT gateway, put sensors on the vehicles, now we have a smart transportation system. It's not been typically a partner we would have worked with, but with IoT now, people thinking about connecting up and sharing data, it's affording these new alliances to happen.
I will say, I think one of the biggest threats to the opportunity, meaning I don't mean to threaten in terms of like an evil actor somewhere, but just in terms of slowing down, we feel almost this imperative to move the wave faster because
Yes.
I do think it can solve some really big problems that are very pressing, and I think it's the pathway to do that. And say the aging population is just one example of that, and there's so many, but it's yes, there are frenemy relationships. Both Samsung and Intel are both going to craft some silicon with radios and processors in it, right? And so there might be lost opportunity. But by far, the broader economic opportunity is in these layers of the finished devices through the apps and the connected services and the implications
And the user
industry-wise wide around all of those things. And so I think that the more we can foster open approaches, then everybody, this is a very big ocean, and there's going to be a lot of
sharks.
Successful,
Just one more thing.
No, we'll go to the audience. We'll go to the audience, and you'll be able to talk. And you have a hand? Okay, please.
At times, who's going to pay for some of these things? Like, I have a Find My iPhone app where I can find another iPhone that I can't find in my house, but when the Malaysian Airlines plane crashed last year, we find out Malaysian Airlines doesn't have a Find My Airplane app. Like, and you would think that would
Not
be
funny,
fundamental.
but
Like,
true. Yeah.
an OnStar car can be tracked. Why can't we track commercial airliners? And supposedly it's airliners don't want to pay $5,000 to put in the satellite systems. So who's going to pay for that?
No, well, hold on a second. Well, the very interesting point that you've raised there is one would have thought there would have been a tracking transponder on a regulated airline. Let me just ask a broader, and both of you made the point about open societies and privacy and more restricted societies. Do you think government is going to be a driver, and taxpayers are going to be a driver of Internet of Things adoption for precisely those kinds of worst-case examples here, because it does become easier to track and do predictive stuff. So, what's your take on
I think the government certainly will be a driver from a regulatory perspective because they love regulation, but they're also going to do it from a financial revenue generation perspective. Let's go back 15 or 20 years. People would not think of a red light camera as an Internet of Thing device, but the government couldn't have perfect policing. They couldn't have a cop on every corner, but now they can put up these cameras, and for some cities, they're making tens of millions of dollars with them.
Shameful, yes.
Yeah.
You said it's shameful?
Yes.
I think there's some.
Because the point is, this is where we reach into these ethical
you can have
questions.
perfect regulation.
There's the notion
with
of
IoT.
you can have a red light camera hidden, and you can have it there as a deterrent, but you make the decision to hide it because you want the revenues rather than the deterrents. So there are an explosion of these things. But the one thing I've learned that's really, really important about running a panel: never have ethical discussions. avoid ethics at all costs.
It's a very interesting question, and I think it's nobody up here knows. Is the bottom line. I think it's going to be everyone's going to pay for it. And I think there's going to be a lot of market dynamics going to flesh it themselves out. Let me give you an example. So you could clearly put these technologies in your home and sort of answer the broad question, is everything okay at home? That's something, it's a universal need, so security and peace of mind, and you can keep things from going wrong, and that's great. Well, what if your insurance company offered to pay for all that for you? And they made your insurance was actually cheaper.
Exactly.
And you got it all for free. How would you feel about that?
And we have the example with the automobile.
And in my case, I'd rather just pay for it, and I don't want to have basically the implications of that data out there. But I think there's a lot of those examples on almost sort of every industry that are going to work themselves out based on market dynamics.
Quick comment and then to the next.
I think the question of how we're going to pay for this, that's a great question. And when we think about IoT, we tend to first think about our Fitband or the thermostat. But really, that's a smaller portion of IoT where we really see the big growth today is around the industrial and the commercial applications.
This is also known as the Internet of Unsexy Things.
It's a little unsexy, but I'll tell you, we talk about our customers that are deploying IoT for these industrial
What's the ratio
applications.
right now?
It's heavy industry.
So for the next 3 years, what's the ratio? And then we'll go to you. What's the ratio between industrial internet a la GE versus consumer-oriented?
Yeah, for
60-40, 50-50?
I would say it's probably like 70-30, and I'll give you a hard reason why. Saya Trucking was on the little slide before here. They have a fleet of 3,000 trucks on the road. They put the sensors in, our gateway, have real-time data that gave real-time feedback to the driver. What happened? It translated into a 6% increase in fuel efficiency in the first year, which was $15 million in savings, and that's
paid for itself.
It paid for itself.
quick commentary, and then we'll take
Government obviously has a role over its safety and security, but don't forget, the government is the #1 purchaser in our nation of products and services. Right. They can also afford to be innovative. It's April, you know, we pay taxes. We want them to be efficient. We want them to be innovative and try new things, and they move markets that way, and they can do that in this case.
I'll make it easy and ask a technology rather than an ethical question. So I assume the vast bulk of these many billions of objects are going to be connected wirelessly. What's the technology? Is it going to be Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Zigbee, NFC, all of the above?
Infrared.
Yeah. I love that question, and I'll say
Intel will make money on all of those answers.
Yeah. That is such a good question, because what you're really talking about when we talk about connectivity, it's all of the above. And so what do? So one of the things you're really touching on here is this notion of we need standards. And for any market, not only do we need to ignite the developers, we need to create standards for ourselves so we can scale this thing. And we have so many, 50 billion devices, that's a lot of different types of platforms and data formats and communications, Zigbee. So one of the things we need to do, and we've been...
is it ITU or IEEE?
It's, these are the things that have to be debated. And we have two emerging standards bodies you probably watched in the market over the last year, the IIC, the Industrial Internet Consortium, and the OIC, the Open Interconnect Consortium. The IIC is focused it's a combination of industry, government, academia, all getting together and figuring out test beds and how to do the interoperability. And then the OIC is focused on the device-to-device connectivity, and to your point about what's the right communication standard. So those are two bodies that I think we can look forward to helping define what those standards are.
Please go ahead. I'm just trying to coordinate for the next.
I don't know how low level you wanted to get with that, but there's a few. There tends to be some early generation technologies that were served this wireless connectivity function that were quite proprietary, meaning a single chip maker, even if they're a sort of quasi-open platform and so on. So we do see a good consolidation behind the scenes towards a narrower set of standards that are open and non-proprietary in terms of who can create the radios and chips and so on. And so I think some of those are clearly in the near term is sort of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and Thread are sort of the most interesting that we see at a low level. But it's not the key roadblock, at this point. Again, it sort of tends to be higher levels up the stack. These radios are getting so inexpensive, set it down to the level of 50 cents, to connect the device to something.
And not just radios, but the sensors as well.
I think you asked a key question, which is about the communication of these devices. Just putting a chip in a refrigerator doesn't do all that much unless it can communicate to the outside world. That's what makes it smart. So, but whether it be Zigbee, RFID, Bluetooth, or near-field communication, fundamentally, they're all hackable. Right? That's where the criminals, if you want to go up the bad guys, that's where they're breaking down the system, is these communications protocol. And when Bluetooth is getting better and more secure, it's still broadly insecure. And the other challenge that we face with these devices is that when you have a computer server, you have tons of processing space for chips and RAM and all that stuff. Once you're getting down to the size of like an implantable medical device, the ability to hard code in security really decreases. You have much less room to work with because it's additional lines of code, and you have very limited code that you can write, or it's an additional drain on the battery that today these devices can't sustain. And some of that may be solved in the future, but from a communication standpoint, those fundamental communications protocols are hackable.
That's a very interesting point, that in fact the gating factor for implantability in devices is that security at the foundation simply isn't tracked, with all due respect to the 50th anniversary of Moore's Law, it's not tractable because of the
room to code.
The room to code. Yeah. You have a question, sir.
Yeah, so that was amazing segue to my question. And the issue is about security. And we have many incidents where it's very easy for you to put all these cameras for your shop or home or whatever it is, to you just watch it from your iPad. But there are so many incidences where people just hack those to know if you're at home or at shop, and they go and rob your shop. So how do you see that working going forward?
I think it's a real issue. I mean, you have some of these focuses on the fewer companies that sort of will win in the platform game will have that true north, that deep security view from the very beginning. But there's also this issue that, like in the consumer space, people that aren't comfortable just shouldn't buy those things, right? If you're worried about a connected lock, as an example, because of some risk of somebody hacking it, even though I think that's very unlikely relative to just kicking a door in, I think just don't buy one. It's not like it's growing there in place on its own. So there's those edges where society will gradually get more comfortable. The issues that are scariest to me, at least, are the places where the consumer's not buying it. It's just there in the ambient environment, and they're not even aware of the monitoring or otherwise.
I'd like to focus on cameras, which was the point of his question. So probably today, cameras are one of the most internet-enabled, most connected devices out there. We have them on our mobile phones, on our iPads, on our laptops.
It's like the ultimate sensor, right?
Exactly.
Image, all of that.
But they're becoming smart too. So cameras, if you go back to CCTV in London 20 years ago, there were police officers and security guards that monitored those, right? That's not true anymore, right? In New York City and in London, they have cameras so that they can detect, and we had this happen 3 years ago, where a camera system called the bomb squad because it detected that a man walked into Lower Broadway, he walked in with a suitcase, a briefcase, and he left without it. According to the camera's algorithm, the camera didn't just see, it watched and understood. Man leaving briefcase behind means bomb, and the camera system called the police, okay? So that's a really cool thing. But most of the cameras that are connected to the internet, the default from the manufacturer is no password. For those cameras that do have password, it's on the first page of the manual that's in PDF format available on the manufacturer's website. And so they can all be hacked, whether it be baby monitors or personal cameras. And I'll just tell one commercial example because people buy security systems thinking that it will protect them. The Crown Casino in Melbourne, Australia had a man come in and played poker. He played for 24 hours and walked away with $33 million. Wow, he's a really good poker player. He was a whale, they thought. Turns out his criminal gang, not a shark, a whale. His criminal gang hacked the camera system, the security system of the casino. He had an earpiece, so they were using the casino's own camera system, like in an Ocean's 11 type thing, to see the dealer's card and tell him how to bet. So we think these security systems may protect us, but they can also be commandeered.
Paramount has that movie coming out in the fall. Question over here.
So we talked a lot about wearables, and obviously they're going to benefit our lives tremendously. But one of the big problems that we have is battery technology, and there's obviously not been tremendous leaps and bounds in battery technology that enables things like an Apple Watch to actually last an entire day at the moment. Do you see like we're going to move to a wireless charging standard where we're just going to be charged all the time, or is there going to be some breakthrough in battery technology that you foresee that's going to enable us to actually carry devices that aren't going to have to be constantly charged?
Gary, and out.
Great question. Moving to wireless, truly wireless charging. If you had attended the CES show earlier in the year, you would have seen Intel's coming out with wireless charging types of devices. So you go into Starbucks and you put your computer down or your phone, it automatically will start charging based on the little tablet that's underneath. It's like a placemat that would go underneath the table. Being able to have a bowl, you throw your keys, your phone in when you get home, that's a wireless charging device. So these are the kinds of things that we have expectations to moving to completely wire-free here in the future.
MIT is doing energy capture stuff. Samsung.
Yeah. Oh, there's a ton of stuff. I mean, I'll focus on outside companies. A good little company, Ubeam, looked at yesterday. Well, you don't have to put it on a mat, or you might as well plug it in. The idea that you're walking around with this thing on and it's charging up in the background. I think I'll say that I'm sort of discouraged at the state of those technologies. I think they're not quite as close as we would want, but they are coming, right? There's an enormous amount of investment going into it, and it's going to continue to be a limiting factor for a couple of years.
Certainly from a consumer perspective, the power life of a product is one of the most critical things right now because it's frustrating to be without one. But in terms of the Internet of Things perspective, the trade-off we face, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have, if devices are talking to devices, they're probably not using a lot of energy, but to save that processing, you have to go through the cloud. If you go through the cloud, you have security and other issues that arise. So there's a trade-off there. If you want, if you're willing to spend more power, you can be more secure. If you have less power, you'll be less secure.
There is a little bit when we talk about I talked about Daikin doing the heating and air conditioning and connecting it up with our gateway, and then you referenced the Target example with the breach that happened a couple years ago. There are things we can do. Even we have all these devices, and we're starting to get excited about connecting them. And what about the security? and so on. And there are things like putting an IoT gateway in the center between the devices at the edge or at the endpoint devices, and having them send their data through an IoT gateway before it goes into the network. That's an opportunity to secure that data and those devices before they get into the cloud. So there are solutions that as we move on this journey with IoT, there are ways to put in the security.
I'm excited about the possibility of an IoT gateway, but what is the IoT gateway in most people's houses today? It's your Linksys router, right?
Yeah.
And the challenge with those old devices is that the firmware is never updated, right? On your iPhone, on your Samsung phone, on your laptop, you're getting updates every day, update, update, update. But a lot of the IoT devices, particularly the legacy ones, don't have an update feature. So that Linksys router, the one that's been in your home, the one through which all your internet traffic travels, as well as perhaps your IoT traffic in the future, those devices haven't been upgraded, and so there are hundreds of known vulnerabilities against them. So an upgrade pathway for the firmware, I think, is really key.
It's also why these supplemental gateways and hubs are happening too. But back on the battery front, just to not be too discouraging,
Sure.
I think there's some, obviously, we're at the point now where like you can put a little sensor in with hundreds of feet of range, and it can run for 2 years on a tiny coin cell battery, right, or something. And so this benefit versus the cost, right, of some of those power usage issues is sort of overwhelmingly in the favor of the benefits now at this point. I think it's a few specific applications like the wearables where it's just really tremendous amount of processing power and a screen and other things like that where we feel it the most. But it's already gotten to that power efficiency level where you can do some pretty amazing things untouched for years.
I want to ask a not to diminish the importance of power and batteries, but I want to ask a non-in-the-weeds question here, because my level of interest from Internet of Things is much more on the level of actionable analytics and monetizing with APIs. And you tell this nice little story, which I think is a very profound little story about the camera is smart enough to do object detection. Person comes in with bag, leaves without bag, trigger. Simple algorithm rule. I'm telling you, I'm at MIT. The stuff going on with machine learning and large data sets is awesome. I mean, pretty bloody impressive. The portfolio of machine learning algorithms has been expanding combinatorially, and their power, k-means cluster, support vector, it's astonishing. The Internet of Things is a data generation, it's orders of magnitude. It's big, yeah, it's a corner. I mean, whatever you want to.
44 zettabytes of data being
44
generated
zettabytes.
by the 50 billion
I
devices,
defy
right?
anybody in this room to call out the number of zeros in a zettabyte, okay?
10 to the 20.
That's cheating. But the point is, by the way, zettabytes are bigger than petabytes here. The point is, who is doing, so where is Intel, where are you guys? Because you're Samsung and Intel, you're managing huge amounts of information. Governments, NSA, managing huge amounts of information. The people at CES who signed agreement, they're generating, what's going on in terms of the predictive analytics you mentioned? I mean, with all due respect to an HVAC company, I'm really thrilled that they can do preventive maintenance. But let's talk about health. Let's talk about smarter cities. What do we think in the next 3 to 5 years is really going to blow people away in this regard? You had a wonderful example of the OnStar, NOC, the Network Operating Center. What are those things going to look like in 3 to 5 years? As we now have, if not yet a zettabyte of data, a petabyte of data to do analytics and predictive analytics.
Well, first of all, the job of the future that's open even today, if you try to hire people, is data analytics.
There you go.
That's, you talk, we obviously are all in the same business of innovation. Innovation changes the status quo. Status quo affects existing jobs, whether it's taxi cab drivers or hoteliers or travel agents. We're also creating jobs. This is one of the huge jobs we're creating, and where should your kid go? Start analyzing data.
Right.
Right on. Yeah.
Right.
If you have a math-oriented kid,
Well,
that's
that's
the
right.
direction.
Yeah, but this notion of analytics, it really is the opportunity that IoT is really representing. We talk about IoT as transformation. The transformation happens because of the analytics. And there's 2 ways to think about it. There's analytics that happen in the cloud, and that's sort of the big data analytics, and we look at high-performance computing and a number of things to crunch all those data sets. But there's analytics that happen at the edge. And so the camera camera that was looking at the guy, figuring that out and doing image recognition and computing a number of data points. They're quickly doing analytics to get to insights right there at the edge before it goes to the cloud.
I love that phrase, analytics at the edge. You think that's going to be one of the faster growing
Absolutely. It's one of the things that as we make these objects, these everyday objects that are smaller and becoming smarter and getting connected, they're also having some compute power to do that analytics at the edge to give you that real-time data that you might need, but then also send that data to the cloud so that you can get the benefit at the richer data set level.
That's definitely a processor-centered, view, right?
Gee, shocking.
Great if a lot of analytics happened at a lot of edges, but so I don't know that that's necessarily the full trend, but it's a good one. I think it's going to be narrow AI, over the next few years. There's lots and lots of this.
The opposite of deep learning, narrow AI.
Yeah, not some sort of
AGI.
the big agent sort of looking at arbitrary patterns in all of this data yet. You're going to see a lot of these applications through an open approach with access to the data on some of these platforms in areas like HVAC maintenance, which are wonderful. I mean, they're going to add to the GDP. They're going to free up resources in all sorts of different ways. So I think it's going to be a constellation of a lot of these narrow applications in sort of all different fields that'll be surprising to people. And I don't know yet. I think we're just at the outset.
But Mark, in your book, you really did have. We saw the little parody of it earlier, the Minority Report. That's where it's going.
Well, I think to focus on big data, clearly you can get big insights, whether you be data analyst, big data. I'm sure there are other panels here at Milken focusing on big data. A couple of things to flag upon that, particularly when you're talking about zettabytes of data. There was an interesting article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal the other day, questioning the end of Moore's Law. And people have predicted the ends of Moore's Law previously. And broadly, I think Moore's Law will continue perhaps through different technologies. But what they said is that our ability to produce data is exceeding our ability to produce chips that can process all of that data. If you look at the volume, and if you go back to 9/11 and look at that case, the NSA had tons of intercepts on the people that were involved in that case, but there's like a 2-year backlog of data, of things that they need to look at, and it's only growing. So that's one thing I want to focus on.
But hold on, the point here. This conversation literally began with a rough consensus that we have to design security in from the get-go. I'm going to make the argument that one of the inferences I'm drawing from this is, as important is the ability, you have to design in the ability to do machine learning and computational analytics from the get-go.
Well, and intelligence-led policing, people are talking about all that. But what happens when the algorithm selects you at Homeland Security because you have the wrong religion, the wrong skin color, or things like that? So the point on all those algorithms and machine learning is they're programmed by human beings and they're not neutral. But there were two important things I wanted to say on the point of the Internet of Things and predicting where it's going. First, some positive examples. When you were discussing the ecosystem, forgive me if you mentioned this, but what I didn't hear is the public, the people, as being part of that ecosystem. And to me, that is so critical, because if you look at the whole app sphere, there are organizations like Code for America, Girls Who Code, things like that, GovLab at NYU, where individual citizens are driving tremendous efficiency and innovation in government. Super cool app from the city of Boston, invented by a citizen.
Potholes.
Rather than going ahead and reporting potholes to the city, you just opt in, and as you drive around the city of Boston, based upon how your car is bumping, it's recording potholes, right? That's awesome, and there are lots of things like that. A point I want to make as we talk to about zettabytes and 50 billion, 200 billion new devices to the internet, is that we think we live in advanced technological times today. We look around and we've got our GPS and our Xbox and our iPhones and our Fitbits, and we think we're at some technological pinnacle. But as you look out at the IoT and you contemplate 78 octillion new devices online with zettabytes of data being produced, we are in the first seconds of the first minutes of the first hours of our technological future. And taking into account Moore's Law, the 100 years that we're about to experience in this 21st century, if you look at that doubling, and consider the exponential change, we're going to have 20,000 years of change in this century alone. So buckle your seats.
That's well said, because what we've found, some people ask, well, why is IoT now? what's happening where all of a sudden we're talking about the Internet of Things? And there's a couple sort of trends that have happened over the last decade. One of which, the first one is the cost of sensors has come down.
Right.
Right? So you'll see, you'll go out, you'll look around, and everything's got sensors on it. So the cost of sensors has come down. Secondly, the cost of connectivity has come down. Remember what we used to pay just to connect our cell phones, that sort of thing. So that's come down, some
Storage.
20 times. Storage has come down, and the third one I was going to mention is the cost of compute. That's come down 60 times over the last decade. So between the cost of sensors, cost of connectivity, cost of compute coming down, now when you talk about what can we do with these endpoint devices, adding in security, doing some analytics at the edge, being able to, this notion of data, when you talk to some of the businesses out in the market and you talk to them about IoT, if you talk to a retailer, right? Data is not their problem. They have tons of data. One of the problems is how do I use it? How do I get insights out of it? So we're very careful as you hear us.
But I'm going to make a different argument. It's interesting because I was at the retail thing.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that they have tons of data. They're not organized around their data. This is the real, once these things are cheaper, you're going to organize around the organizing principle is not your SKU, it's the data envelope and the processing envelope and the sensing envelope of that SKU. We have a question here.
Let's maybe lead into this question.
Great.
Bridget mentioned two cases, transportation fleet management and HVAC maintenance, where Intel's already, customers are already using the Internet of Things. And Mark mentioned this traffic app. I just wonder, as Intel, or for that matter, Samsung, looks at the near-term business case for IoT, what do you see the first 3 or 4 big, or small for that matter, verticals where you see it rolling out? Is it electric utilities where you have to manage a big network, or water utilities, or is it traffic management to the app point? What does Intel or Samsung see as the 3 or 4 biggest kind of near-term actionable industrial
What are the verticals that are going to be disrupted by this?
Yeah, great question. I can say that, for now, right, as we're looking as things unfold, I would say transportation is a great one, smart transportation, the impact of getting fuel efficiencies, reducing CO2 emissions, I think that's a really good one. And we're seeing customers getting return right away. Second one is around energy, smart energy. We have customers deploying, it's not just heating and air conditioning, but checking, the water, right? We have a customer that in the city of Manhattan used the IoT gateway and sensors around their building and connected it to the other building management systems, and were able to detect a water leak in an area that—
Physical asset management.
And so that translated to $1 million savings in the first year, of deployment in one building. So smart energy. And the third one is, I think, also around smart retail. This is where, to your point about, this is a very mature industry, lots of SKUs. We have the interaction, you talk about the crowd and the public, very interactive shopping, right? So there's terrific opportunity around smart retail. And then I think in terms of healthcare, that is a huge market. That is, might even say, one of the biggest, if not the biggest market. It ends up being a little slow, however, because they already have a lot of devices. They have blood pressure cups, they have radiology equipment, they have any number of things, a lot of devices to connect up, but the impact and the improvement by connecting that together to help with, remote patient monitoring at the home, understanding more precise therapies because you've been able to analyze the data for a particular patient. So I think those are probably the top.
Okay. So I'd agree with all those. So we'd add smart home to that as well, and sort of all the general implications in and around the home. But it's, we also look at these layers of opportunity for component level technologies, devices. A lot of people are going to sell a lot of devices in the space, these user experience platforms and data platforms. Right. And then services. And I think there's, in the industry at large, there's opportunities in all those spaces. And I don't know that we predict the verticals perfectly. In the why is it happening now front. I would actually, yes, all those sort of underlying technologies, but why is Uber happening now, let's say, as an example? Well, smartphones exist everywhere. That's one of the conclusions would be
it's an infrastructure that's becoming an
infrastructure that enables this higher order opportunity space. And I think there's a lot of that now too. There's going to be these narrow applications that are enormous.
Oh, why do smart things exist? I mean, you guys solve a phenomenal problem of comfort of what's going on in your home in every level, from safety to physical structure. I mean, it's amazing for a few $100s what you can do.
That's why
that was not a paid commercial, but it's an amazing product.
But these underlying pieces of infrastructure are what build. I mean, it's what allows the Moore's Law and other stuff to continue to happen, right? The layers continue, and that enables the acceleration.
Our last question, sir.
The radio frequency environment, particularly in cities, is getting out of hand. So if I go to a cafe in New York or San Francisco, oftentimes I can't even get on the Wi-Fi because there's 40 networks there. So you're talking about the explosion of devices, but they're all sharing the same frequencies. So can you guys talk a little bit about how that future looks and what's to prevent us from making those mistakes where we're not actually innovating in a harmonious way?
Quick answers.
So we, as an association representing over 2,000 technology companies, has fought to grab some spectrum to solve those problems. And we're still, there's a broadcast direction. Broadcasters get 5% of the population, and they're sitting on a huge swath of spectrum. But there's a lot of spectrum out there that's totally underused, including government spectrum.
That's the advertisement. Be supportive of those efforts.
Yeah, support the efforts. Tell your elected representatives that you need that spectrum rather than have it for people with an over-the-air free.
Absolutely. That's a huge point. And then there's software-defined radios and other technologies in the base that let it dynamically pick spectrum, but it's a lot of cool stuff in that.
I would, quick comment?
I support everything they say. The challenge with so many points of contact is you can't have trustworthy networks, right? What is the real Wi-Fi? People are putting up rogue femtocells to hijack cell phone signals, so it becomes complex from a trust perspective.
To end by quoting Andy Grove, that's only the paranoid survive. I just have to say, I want to thank our panel. I think they've done a terrific job. They've clearly been open. They've clearly been focused on this. I want to thank the panel, and I want to thank you for your time and attention.
Well done, man. That's great. Yeah, I'd love to talk more.